Hello, this is Pastor Mike of Southern Oregon, and I'm here today we're going to talk about the absolute rights of man and the tyranny of the majority. This will be under Code 2019 V0012. The date today is April 23rd, 2019, and this is, of course, the Investment in Truth Review video presentation. Now, earlier I posted on Facebook a treatise that was entitled The Inherent Inalienable Rights of the Individual and the Tyranny of the Majority. That was under Code 2019 A0361, posted on Facebook on the 16th of this month in April 2019 at 10:05 p.m. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to address some of the same issues that were brought up in that treatise, that written treatise, which was on Facebook. You can still scroll down to it and you can still see it. If you have anything to say, Rick, while I'm making this, just feel free, and if you have questions or something like that. All right, let me jump right into the disclaimers. The information provided herein is for educational, truth, and knowledge purposes only. No specific course of action is directed, which means we're not telling you to do any particular thing, except the advancement of knowledge and truth. I now state and clearly declare that I am addressing the subject matter set forth herein as a pastor of God in my religious and ecclesiastical capacity and office, and that I am exercising my official function to keep religious believers informed of their various rights, freedoms, and liberty under God and relative to their awareness and understanding of the various laws of man. Therefore, I hereby declare, claim, and assert any and all religious protections of whatsoever nature and kind, including protection from discrimination on the basis of religion, available under the inherent, inalienable, primary, and subordinate rights and laws. The Remnant Church of Southern Oregon, Mike Benjamins, Jr., I'm a pastor, in both his personal and ecclesiastical capacities, including his subordinates and personnel, individually and jointly, disclaim any and all liability and or responsibility for any damages sustained or suffered by the readers, viewers, or other entities in the implementation of the teaching set forth in this treatise or video. The material is provided as a research study project for learning purposes only, and any implementations and or applications contrary to my various cautionary statements are undertaken at the sole risk and peril of the readers, viewers, or entities. No statement is made or implied as to the ultimate outcome resulting from such implementations and or applications. Now, I want to add a little something to what I just read here in the disclaimer, and that is that I state that it's for religious believers in God, and that I'm exercising my function as a pastor. But I want to add to that, if you don't believe in God and you just happen to be watching this video, this information can be important to you as well. So just because you're not a believer in God, and just because you're not a member of a church, and just because I'm a pastor, doesn't mean that you should shut the video off and say, okay, well, this is for believers, so I'm not going to watch or listen, or probably nothing here for me. Well, that would be a mistake. There's a lot here for everybody. As a matter of fact, in my treatise that I published on Facebook, as I talked about earlier under the code number that it was posted on, which was 0361, it begins by saying, to all mankind. This is for everybody. And this is not just for people in the United States, it's for every person in humanity all over the world. I want to add here too, this comes straight out of the treatise, And this is what I wrote: in this treatise, whenever I use words like man, mankind, humanity, including other words and phrases of similar import, the masculine gender shall include the feminine, and the singular shall include the plural. So just because it says man doesn't mean it's not for females as well. And just because I may speak in the singular, it's intended to include the singular and the plural. All right. I'm going to do some reading and then I'm going to do some talking. This is very important information for people to get. And I'm just going to jump right in and we'll see where we end up with this thing. We have long pondered, asserted, demanded, struggled, fought, and died for the absolute rights of man, which include pre-existing, inherent, human, natural, pre-political, and God-given inalienable rights. But, my friends and brethren, if we neglect to understand and acknowledge access to such fundamental rights, freedoms, and liberty, invested in the sovereign individual, as an inherent and inalienable right, as a necessary part of life and existence in a state of freedom and liberty at the individual level, separate from the voice of the collective sovereign people, through some application of, presumed justification for, or seizure of power of the will of the majority, by a process of voting or otherwise, thus bringing into reality the specter of a system of the tyranny of the majority over the individual's inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty, then, my friends and brethren, we have, knowingly or unknowingly, nullified and defeated the very concept and reality of inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty, far from the very doctrine of the absolute rights of man upon earth and beyond. Now, this term that I used, the absolute rights of man, as I stated before in other videos, it comes straight out of Blackstone's commentaries. This is Blackstone's here, Volume 1. On page 121, Sir William Blackstone refers to these rights of mankind as the absolute rights of man. So if you're wondering where I got that terminology from, it comes straight out of Blackstone's commentaries. I'm going to continue reading and then I probably will do some commentary. Let's see where we end up with this. In doing so, we have, contrary to the doctrine that we were all created as human beings upon equal terms, joined the ranks of the tyrants of history, who have, by their own beliefs, wants, desires, ambitions, justifications, agendas, acts, and or omissions, wrought in seizure of power and dominion over others, by whatever means at hand, without the actual consent and agreement of each individual, declared by operation and practice that inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty do not in fact exist. Now I'm going to clarify just a little bit before I continue. We have to understand that when we speak of inherent and inalienable rights, it has to apply to the individual. It can't be a situation where the only way you can have inherent and inalienable rights is through the agreement of the rest of the people, because that doesn't make any sense. The individual is the starting point. That's where it begins. And inherent and inalienable rights have to belong to the individual. Then you have a bunch of individuals with inherent and inalienable rights who make up the collective sovereign people. It isn't that the only way that you can have inherent and inalienable rights is as part of the collective people. Or if the collective people were to say, well, we decide, the majority of them decide that we're going to take away everybody's inherent and inalienable rights in a specific area. You can't do that if the individual doesn't agree to go along with it. And I'll get into why that is. But I want you to think for a minute that if the only way you can access your basic inherent and inalienable rights, what Blackstone calls the absolute rights of man, is if the rest of the people agree that you should have those rights, then you might as well throw out inherent and inalienable rights entirely, because it can't work that way. Then what you've got is you've got the tyranny of the majority deciding what your inalienable and inherent rights are, if you in fact still have any. What if they agree to do away with all of them? Then you have no such rights anymore. And so it's important that you think in those terms, that you think in terms that it all begins with the individual. Now in part 2, in my 2-part treatise that I did, and the study that I did entitled The Awful Truth About Voting, and this is under code number 2018-0249, I wrote, in the year 507 BC, the Athenian leader Cleisthenes introduced a system of political reforms that he called democratia, or rule by the people. This new system, which came about in part due to the failures and corruptions of non-democratic government, of course involved a voting process. They would vote by collecting white and black pebbles, little stones, meaning a yes or no vote, into a voting receptacle out of which the votes would thereafter be tallied. That process became the humble beginnings of today's democratic government voting system. It is characteristic of and reflects a system recognized by democracy, voting, and majority vote. And over time, we have become accustomed, because, since 507 BC, then this concept of democracy has been around for a long time. And over time, we have distanced ourselves and distanced our thinking from the idea that the individual has inherent and inalienable rights outside of a system of democratic majority vote. And we have to bring that knowledge back to the people, so that the individual realizes that he has access to these basic and absolute rights of man, independent from their agreement or what the majority might want to do. That's important for you to understand. Now, there's a lot of places where this can be verified. For one of the places where this becomes kind of, I've been told lately that not to use the word obvious too much, but anyway, to me, it's sort of obvious. In the preamble to the Constitution, it says, and I'm picking out various phrases without mentioning them all, "We, the people of the United States, establish justice and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity." Okay, now, when you talk about the blessings of liberty, liberty has to include rights and freedoms. And it has to include these basic rights of man that Blackstone was talking about. Now, I wrote a little more than that. I said, that's us, my friends and brethren. When we say to ourselves and our posterity, that's us. That's us. That's still valid today. It says, we the people establish justice. Not we the government. We the people establish justice and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And liberty includes inherent and inalienable rights and freedoms at the individual and at the collective level. Remember that the collective sovereign people are made up of inherently sovereign individuals who hold inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty. Okay. By implementation, use, and practice over the centuries since 507 BC, it appears that we have forgotten the absolute rights of man in terms of individual, inherent, and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty, and have fallen prey to the notion that all the inherent and inalienable rights of man are subject to a democratic system of majority vote, and, by extension, subject to any exercise of power arising from an umbrella of democratic appearance and justification, thus believing at some fundamental level that democracy, as a means to an end, will address and in large part solve the societal and related problems of mankind. That has led, as we can clearly observe and contemplate before us, to an ever more apparent realization of the tyranny of the majority over the inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty of the people individually and collectively. It is, in fact, a paradigm recognizable as the people versus the individual. That brings into focus the on-point and an inescapable question. Have we pondered, asserted, labored, demanded, struggled, fought and died for the absolute rights of man, which include pre-existing, inherent, human, natural, pre-political, and God-given and alienable rights in vain? Because if we've lost that connection to the individual's right to have their inherent and inalienable rights, then what have we been fighting and dying for centuries? Trying to gain some sort of recognition and some sort of acknowledgement that an individual and the collective group of individuals have such inherent rights. Otherwise, all of that was for nothing if we let it just evaporate before us now. We shouldn't let that happen. Let us not forget, my friends and brethren, that it is the sovereign people, individually and collectively, that created the government by a process founded upon and implemented by operation and grant of well-defined law and limited powers. We granted powers to the government, yes, but we granted them limited powers within parameters that the people decided, in which the creation of government is instituted among men by the consent of the people in their individual and collective capacities, so that the rights, freedom, and liberty of the people by such government which exists by the consent of the governed shall protect, preserve, and defend the inherent and inalienable rights of the people, collectively and individually, not just collectively, individually as well, thereby bringing into reality a continuing state of free existence reflective of genuine liberty. So it's important for us to understand that. We didn't create, the people did not create government so that they could take our rights away. I've said it before and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to be a little bit repetitious about some of this so it has extra impact. So that you say, oh yeah, that irritating guy told me about this a bunch of times and now I can't forget it. That's good if you can't forget it. It's important. So we did not create the government so that it could take our rights away at will or well, the way it is right now, they actually take the rights of the people away, collectively and individually, and then turn right around and blame it back on the people again. Says, that's what you want. That's what you want us to do. No, that's not what we want them to do, is to take away our inherent and inalienable and absolute rights of man. That's not what we created government for. Government was created to protect those rights that we have and to keep us in a state of freedom. In this study and analysis, we must be forever alert and vigilant that a state of continued free existence wherein the inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty of the people, individually and collectively, are protected, preserved, and defended, and does not morph into a form, shape, condition, or reality of a government-dictated, controlled, and regulated state of existence, wherein the rights, freedom, and liberty of the people is whatever the government says it is, built and instituted upon a system of law and practice wherein the law is whatever the government likewise says it is, based upon some theory of an all-encompassing majority vote and rule, packaged, sold, and marketed to the people as the voice and will of the people, individually and collectively. You see how they turned it right back around on you? This is your fault that we're taking your rights away. This is what you want. This is what you created government for. This is what you are asking us to do. And this is for your best interest, and that's why you asked for it. Well, you've got to make it clear. We, the people, have to make it clear. That's not what we created government for. So that we can't protect ourselves by the right to keep and bear arms and be able to protect ourselves, and then we have to wait around for somebody else with a gun to come save us from the inevitabilities of life. We need to be protecting ourselves. I used to be a police officer, and I can tell you for sure that the police aren't always there in time and aren't always available to help you out when you really need it. Sometimes you got to help yourself out. Sometimes you got to protect yourself and your family, and even sometimes your neighbors, you see. Now, if the police are there in a few seconds and everything's hunky-dory, that's great. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that it doesn't always happen. And you can't rely on that. The very notion that we have to wait around to be protected, in my opinion, is unworkable. And that is not the position that the people should be in. Just as human society, existing by way of a healthy and functioning societal foundation, must be made up of stable and vital family units, so too must humanity be made up of individuals, existing in a state of inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty, wherein and whereby a healthy and functioning regional and global people of the planet Earth may exist and thrive. That condition wherein it must be acknowledged that all men, people, when I say men here, I mean people, all people, were and are created equal, each possessing the same rights, freedom, and liberty, originating with the individual inhabitant upon this precious earth, shall be the beginning point thereof. That, my friends and brethren, is self-evident. So, let me talk about that for a minute. A society is made up of family units. That is the basic constituent societal unit that all society is built on. A healthy and functioning and stable and vital family unit. If you destroy that, if the health of the family unit starts to go down the drain, so will society go down the drain. We have to have proper family units to build a society. So too must the global people of the planet Earth, the individuals who make up that, so too must they have their rights if we are to have a healthy and functioning system. And in such a system, it needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be understood, and it needs to be clear to everybody that we were all created upon equal terms, no matter where you are on this planet. We were all created on equal terms, and that we all possess the same rights, freedom, and liberty, originating with the individual inhabitants of the planet Earth. That's why I say, that's why when I wrote this treatise, I have it right here, it says right on there, to all mankind. It isn't just for people in the United States. It isn't just for people in the West. It's for people everywhere. And I hope that this information spreads to everybody so that they all realize this, because we've forgotten it. We've forgotten it. And with the advent in 507 BC of Demokratia, which is now our democracy, many have come to believe that the only way they can have rights is through a majority vote of the people, or a vote of the government, or government action. That's how we get our rights. Well, that isn't how you get your inherent and inalienable rights. That isn't how you get them. You already had them before the government even existed. What we have now, and I especially added this to my notes here, what we have trying to happen, and actually is happening, is the criminalization of various inherent and inalienable rights. Let me say that again. What we have trying to happen, and is actually happening, is the incremental but steady criminalization of various inherent and inalienable rights. See, we're getting to the point now where some of the things that we want to do, which are actually inherent and inalienable rights, are starting to be codified into the criminal code. That you can't have those rights, otherwise it becomes a criminal violation. That's why I call it the criminalization of various inherent and inalienable rights. And if we talk, for instance, about the right to keep and bear, I always use the term adequate arms. Not just the right to keep and bear arms, but the right to keep and bear adequate arms. Because if people come after you and they're more heavily armed and better armed than you are, you're going to be in trouble. So you have to have adequate arms. Unless somebody can guarantee you that they'll only be armed the way you are, if you are in fact still allowed to be armed, they're only going to be armed with the same kind of arms you have or less, which of course nobody can guarantee you that, then you need to have at least as adequate enough arms to be able to protect yourself when somebody comes after you with more than a 10-round magazine or whatever, you see. That's another thing, if they say to you, well, it's an offense for you to have more than 10 rounds in your magazine, that's criminalization of an inherent and inalienable right to protect yourself with adequate arms. Be aware of that. Be aware of, I cannot emphasize this enough. I want to make sure that you understand what's happening here. Be it therefore known, I wrote, that human society is fundamentally founded upon the bedrock of the individual human inhabitant, not upon the notion that inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty can be protected, preserved, or defended upon the establishment and overriding force and power of a system of agreement, vote, or other implementation of practice or procedure based upon the foundation of the absolute rights of majorities. We don't exist individually, certainly we shouldn't, by the absolute rights of majorities, and that's all you can get, is if the majority agrees to it. Get that out of your head. That's not the way it's supposed to work. Now, I'm not saying that we're against all majority voting. No, I'm talking about, everything would be this wide. Your inherent and inalienable rights is a narrower slice of it. I'm talking about inherent and inalienable rights. If for instance, you want to have a majority vote to vote for the president or to vote for, some politician who's running for office, I don't have a problem with that. Let the majority vote work for that. We're not talking about inherent and inalienable rights there. I'm not against that kind of majority vote. I don't want to do away with all majority voting. I want to do away and make sure that you understand. Well, when I say do away, I'm going to explain a little bit more about that. But anyway, the thing of it is, I want you to understand that if you don't agree to it, you say, hey, I'm not going to subject my right to keep and bear adequate arms to a majority vote. I don't consent to that. Remember when we talked about the consent of the governed? That's individually and collectively. If you individually say, I don't consent to that, and you say, I withdraw any kind of consent to subject my inherent and inalienable rights to a majority vote. And you notify the government of that. And you say, look, I do not consent to it. I want to keep my inherent and inalienable rights. Then, under those conditions, you can assert your right not to have your inherent and inalienable rights infringed by a majority vote. But you have to notify them that you don't give them consent to do it. Because there's presumed and assumed consent happening right now. And if you remain silent about it, they just continue with presuming that you consent to it, that you agreed to it. And then they turn around and say, well, we're doing this because you told us to. That's what you hired us for. That's what you voted for us for. Everything like that, you see. It all back engineers back onto you. You have to do something about that. Lest we recognize, acknowledge, and heed these basic and fundamental axiomatic truths, we shall be a party to the eventual loss of knowledge of inherent and inalienable rights, freedoms, and liberty in humanity, either viewed as a God-given basis of rights, freedom, and liberty, or as an inherent human and natural right. That's for people who don't believe in God and don't believe that their rights came from God. And they say, well, I have a right as a human being. I was born with those rights as an inherent right and a natural right. Okay, whichever version is present in the hearts and minds of the individual human being. So like I said, this isn't just for believers. It's also for people who, I hope that everybody becomes a believer because God is real and his truth is real, and his grant of inalienable inherent rights to mankind, that's real too. But if you don't, that doesn't mean that you don't have inherent and inalienable rights. I want to make that clear. I have also written, whereas the people are endowed with various rights, including, but not limited to, pre-existing, inherent, natural, human, and God-given inalienable rights, also referred to as pre-political rights, meaning it predates the political system, by the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia in D.C. versus Heller, cited as 554 U.S. 570 in 2008. All such rights hereinafter also simply referred to as inherent rights. When I say inherent rights, I mean all that stuff. Which rights pre-exist the states, state government and laws, the U.S. Constitution and its amendments, and the federal government and its laws, and do not come and were not granted by such state and federal governments, but which governments are created by the people to secure and protect such pre-existing inherent rights, wherein the Bill of Rights should more properly have been named the Bill of Protections of Inherent Rights. That among such rights of the people, but not limited only to those set forth herein, are the right of and to life, liberty, and property, and an existence in a state of freedom, the right to have a real relationship with and access to the sovereignty and jurisdiction of the biblical God, the right to access the legal authority of the word of the biblical God in both rights of conscience, in that rights of conscience means that you believe in it. You don't just have the right to believe in it. That's only half of the equation. You also have to have right to access scripturally mandated conduct, free exercise of biblical doctrine within a genuine, not one-sided, no-harm rule model. Now, I spoke in other videos about the no-harm rule. You need to watch the other videos and you'll understand. As set forth in Holy Biblical Writ, the right of self-protection by the keeping and bearing of adequate arms, the right of and to freedom of speech, the right of association with others, the right to contract, the right to move from place to place, the right to have a family and children, including holy matrimony under the sovereignty and jurisdiction of the biblical God, or a civil state marriage, whichever one you choose, the right to shelter from the elements, meaning that you have a right to shelter yourself from the elements and have a home. It's part of your right to life, in a legally private, not commercially regulated model of freedom, as well as other inherent rights not specifically mentioned herein. That's what I wrote in some of my other treatises. Let it therefore also be known and acknowledged that inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty depend upon our ability to think and process facts and information correctly, unfettered by misinformation, propaganda, conditioning, and or agenda-based thought alteration, masquerading as proper education, as is going on in some colleges right now. Away from our human foundations of individual access to and possession of our inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty. You got to be careful. I'm not going to name specific colleges and universities, but you got to be careful about some of the, what I called here, misinformation, propaganda, conditioning, and or agenda-based thought alteration. Away from the notion that the individual has inherent and inalienable rights, thinking that everything can be the subject of a majority vote, which it certainly cannot be if you don't agree. Otherwise, there are no inherent and inalienable rights. Then what you have is a system of privileges and immunities based on the whims of the unstable vote of the majority. Because the vote of majority can go one way at one moment and go the other way the next time. You don't know. It's not, who knows what could happen there. Such individual rights, which of necessity must begin with a fundamental right to life and existence, extending to the various other inherent and inalienable rights, freedoms, and liberties, whereupon we now focus, belong to the individual human being from conception to extreme old age upon the precipice of death, and cannot therefore be subject to denial, loss, or deprivation in whole or part, or to such degree as a majority of the sovereign people, or a majority vote, or a majority vote within elected government officials, or other form or means of implementation by the government they have created. Can't be done that way. You see, it belongs to the individual. If that were not so, then we must face the contradictory and unstable right of other living individuals or groups made up of such living individuals who themselves exist upon the inherent right to life, because we're talking about the inherent right to life, to take it upon themselves outside of the boundaries of conviction for a capital crime based on due process of law, to deprive other human beings of their inherent and inalienable right to life. And that's what we got going on, you see. If you could go back in a time machine and go back to your mother's womb, and then you say, well, I have a right to life, because I still remember, I went back in a time machine and now I'm back in the womb, but now some majority vote is going to snuff me out. My right to life doesn't exist because a group of individuals by majority vote decided to take it away. It's called abortion, you see. If you personalize it like that and you say, well, I went back in a time machine, now I'm back in the womb, now somebody's going to snuff me out by a majority vote. And you say, well, I don't really care for that. But there's a lot of people out there that once they're already part of they already have their life and they're asserting their right to life, they don't seem to mind if we snuff out somebody else's right to life. We just forgot that we were all created on equal terms. That's what we forgot. We were all created on equal terms. And where do those rights take hold? At what moment do those rights take hold? Well, I wrote they take hold from conception to extreme old age upon the precipice of death. That's where they take hold. And I get very impatient when people start saying, well, those unborn fetuses aren't really human beings yet. By what kind of logic are they not human beings? I asked you. By what kind of logic? I have long stated and asserted that the Supreme Court of these United States, by a process of majority decision, as we have addressed within the context of this treatise and now this video, in the case of Roe versus Wade, cited as 410 U.S. 113 in 1973, I was alive when that happened, I remember when it came in, did not in reality possess the power or grant of power before God or man, pursuant to proper law, which protects the inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty of the people, specifically to life, because we were talking in Roe versus Wade, we're talking about abortion, so specifically the right to life, to authorize a pregnant mother or a medical practitioner to terminate the life of another living human being at the beginning stages of existence with no other justification but that such a life may be summarily terminated. That has been a point of concern and objection within the religious community since that 1973 decision. Now, I asked you this, where would the Supreme Court have gotten this grant of power to make the decision to allow a mother, because, you know, if you're going to pass this power on from the Supreme Court to a mother or to a doctor who's going to perform these abortions, where would you have gotten that right from to do that? You have to have it first. You have to have that power first to pass it along to somebody else. Where would you have gotten that power to snuff out that unborn fetus? To give that power to somebody else? Where would that have come from? I maintain to this day that they never had the power to grant that power to the mother or to a physician. I want you to really think about that. And I want you to go back in a time machine and look at it as if you were the one that was going to be snuffed out. Maybe you're okay with that. If you are, I really think you ought to think about your thinking processes. Clearly, it is my duty and obligation to point out that such actions and omissions as have been wrought and brought into existence through a system of majority practice and procedure, exercising powers to override the inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty of the people, individually or collectively, is inconsistent with and in violation of the no-harm rule standard. There's supposed to be a no-harm rule standard. We're supposed to do no harm. Well, we sure are doing harm. We're doing harm to living human beings, for one thing. Unless you want to claim that because you're not born yet, you're not living. In this life, if my life is to have any meaning at all, my friends and brethren, as well as my brothers and sisters in the greater family of humanity, then we had better not summarily dismiss such truths as I have painstakingly and laboriously brought to your attention in this and in my other writings and videos, which are available on this fine day in the month of April in the year 2019, by or through some fashion, form, or manifestation of agenda-based haste. There's a lot of people that are manifested in agenda-based haste. And I think you should slow down. Don't be in haste. Think these things through very carefully. Think them through very carefully. We stand upon the inherent duty, burden, obligation, and responsibility as human beings upon this precious earth to address and carefully consider deep down in our hearts to the very marrow of our bones and into the most intricate workings of our God-given minds to contemplate and properly evaluate the absolute, inherent, and inalienable rights of man, with emphasis on pre-existing human, natural, inherent, pre-political, and God-given inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty, as against the assumed or presumed absolute rights of the majority. I'll read that last part again. Against the assumed or presumed absolute rights of the majority. I will close with this thought. I believe, as many other biblical believers also do, that God is a real and living God endowed with sovereignty, jurisdiction, and kingship, as well as a jurisdictionally authoritative word, and that we as believers, individually and collectively, must have access to him as God and exist within and under his divine reality. Consider then, within the context of a system of majority practice and procedure, that if a majority vote could, by a process of a majority agreement or finalization, reach a conclusion, decision, decree, or judgment by operation and interpretation of law, that would be man's law, that the individual believer could, by virtue thereof, by virtue of this process of majority vote, be cut off and legally blocked from the sovereignty, jurisdiction, and kingship of God, and or the jurisdictional authority of him as the Word, does the majority, in whatever capacity it may manifest, actually have the power and authority? Considering that all that I have thus far addressed, revealed, taught, and shared, to deprive the individual of his or her inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty, within that context, or in other applications covered by the subject matter we now address or have addressed in other studies? I think not, my friends and brethren, and it is my fervent hope that I have done an adequate enough job to allow you to come to the same conclusions. I hereby request, this is what I wrote in the treatise, I'm going to read it to you. I hereby request that if you find what I have presented and written here, and now on video, as having merit and value, then please share it with as many others as you can reasonably reach. Once again, I need your help. I can't reach all these people by myself. I need your help. This I ask not for myself, or for some pursuit of personal importance or recognition. No, my request is that you do it for yourself, for your own individual inherent and inalienable rights, which will be gone if we don't do something about it, and for the knowledge and benefit of all our brothers and sisters in the greater family of humanity, so that the inherent and inalienable rights, freedom, and liberty of the individual, through which the collective sovereign humanity also benefits, shall not perish from this earth. Any questions or statements?
Towards the beginning of your talk, you were talking about that we the people don't want the government to take our rights. That being said, some people, too many in fact, are demanding that the government do take rights, theirs included. And obviously you're asserting that if those people wish to give up their rights, well, so be it, but that doesn't give them the authority to take ours as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially if we don't consent to it.
Right.
Now, if we don't say anything, there will be presumed consent. Yeah.
The other thing is you're talking about the police being there to take care of our problems or dangers for us. And I wrote just a quick thing here that even if the police did have enough power and ability to be everywhere, which is a problem of its own if they had that kind of power ability, that still doesn't change the fact that it doesn't change our right to take an active participation in our own defense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, we're moving, as you know, in some places in the world, they're moving towards that, to say that you can't defend yourself.
Yeah, you have no right to take any
Right.
participation.
That's the next step, you see.
Yeah.
First they say you have to wait for the police. And then I guess it's assumed if you say, well, wait for the police, but it shouldn't be assumed that while you're waiting for the police that you couldn't protect yourself. But we're moving in some places towards the law actually stating that you can't defend yourself. You see,
Or certainly creating that de facto state.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what happens. I mean, what happens is it moves incrementally to a worse position for the individual to be able to hold on to their inherent and inalienable rights. But, you know, it should be pretty obvious, really, to most people that the police can't be everywhere, like you say, and the police aren't always Johnny on the spot for when you need them. Maybe it's a life and death situation we're talking about, and if they come too late, you could be dead by the time they get there. Then it's a homicide investigation, you see. So I don't know what kind of point were you trying to make about the police that
Well, the fact that even if the government were so powerful, which is a problem of its own, but
if they get that powerful,
even if they were so powerful that they could protect you, that changes nothing.
Exactly.
You still have an absolute right to take an active participation in your own defense.
Exactly.
As well as that, I wrote here, adequate arms are necessary for liberty as well as personal defense. The balance of power requires that both sides of a system possess the means to assert liberty. It is insufficient to proclaim liberty actually and physically, but be unable to actually and physically pursue it.
Right.
Otherwise, you have an unarmed group trying to stand up to a group in power who are heavily armed. And we all know what happens when people without guns stand up to people with guns.
Exactly. So what you're saying, I think that I'm going to repeat this point that you're trying to say. If they were to make the argument that, look, we're able to protect you, no matter what, that should not nullify your right to protect yourself, even if they could.
It changes nothing.
Even if they could.
Even if they could.
Right.
Which, if they actually had that kind of power, that's a problem all its own. You know, if a government reaches the power where they can absolutely control everything, that's already, you know.
Then you've got another problem called the government that's too big.
Yeah. That sort of power and control and tyranny is its own problem.
Exactly. Is there anything else you want to bring up? No. Okay. I purposely tried to make this video not to be too long. I just wanted to make various points that I thought were important. If you have not read my treatise that's already on Facebook, well, certainly do read it. It's about the same subject matter. Of course, I said things here that I didn't say in the treatise. That happens when you make videos. Extra things get added in. This is important stuff, people. This is important stuff. I'm going to say it again. I need your help. I am just one person. I've got a lot of background in these kinds of subjects and in these rights issues and in these legal issues. But even so, I cannot reach everybody. I need your help to get this turned around so people don't think in terms of everything about me and all my rights and freedoms are based on a majority vote. They are not. And we need to get the word out about that, and I need you to get involved. I need you to have people watch this video, to say, hey, you really, get your friends and say, boy, I watched this video, you really need to see it. Why don't you come over and we'll watch it together or whatever. And then discuss it after you watch the video together. Discuss it with each other. You see, you need to interact with each other. We, the people, have to act to preserve our individual and collective inherent and inalienable rights. Now, I understand, like my son just said, there are people out there that apparently are okay with giving up their inherent and inalienable rights. And they seem to also be okay with taking away yours. They don't want only theirs gone. They want everybody's gone. That's problematic. Now, there's people like that out there. Hey, if they want to live like that, if they don't want their inherent and inalienable rights, well, I suppose freedom of choice, you see. I suppose free will takes over, and if they want to make those decisions for themselves, then I'm not going to stop them. If they want to go ahead and tell the government, yes, I want you to vote on all of my basic absolute rights of man, that what Pastor Mike and Blackstone called the absolute rights of man, I want you to vote on those at will, and if you vote some of my absolute rights away, well, I'm okay with it. Well, that's fine. What we've got a problem with is where they want to make it applicable to everyone, even the ones who say, I don't consent to that. I'm not going to consent to it. And I'm telling you that within the model of government that at least in the United States that I've been able to study and look at, and I've also looked at other legal writings, historical legal writings, and that absolutely show that the individual has inherent and inalienable rights. And we need to bring that knowledge back to the people who have forgotten it. We really do. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close out this video. This has been another Investment in Truth Review instructional video by Pastor Mike Benjamins Jr. of the Remnant Church in Southern Oregon, USA. It has been an honor and a privilege to be able to instruct you in so important a subject matter. Thank you for your attention, interest, consideration, and support. This is Pastor Mike saying, take care, and as applicable, God bless.